So the next transformation or change on a graph of a trig function that we're going to have is this idea of a horizontal stretch or compress. So it's going to stretch or pull like my slinky left and right, so it's going to elongate it or it's going to tighten it up. Okay, and that has to do with the frequency. And so the form for this, we're going to use the letter B because that's most common, and B is found within that angle. And what that B says is that I'm going to have B number of cycles in 360 because that's what sine normally cycles in, so I'm going to have B number of them in 360. So how can I find how many I'm going to have altogether in 1? I would go 360 divided by B. And that's the same thing if I have cosine. It just says I have B number of cycles in 360. So we take 360 or 2 pi and divide it by B. So if I take a look at this first problem over here, it says I'm going to have 2 cycles in sine's regular 360, which we call also a period. So I'm going to have 360 divided by 2. So that says sine's going to cycle in 180. In other words, I have 2 cycles in 360. So that means 1 cycle is going to happen in 180. So it's a division. So how am I going to graph this? I graph sine. Again, I'm not graphing it to scale. I'm just looking at sine. And instead of ending in 360 now, I'm going to end in 180. So again, I just take halves, and I see I'm counting by 45s. So that's 135. But notice the location of the B. So the next one, it says I'm going to have a half of a cycle in 360. So in other words, 360 divided by a half. That's 360 divided by a half. And to divide, you multiply by the reciprocal. So if I have a half of a cycle in 360, that means a whole cycle is going to happen in 720. So if I drew it to scale compared to the first one, it would be this really elongated sine graph. It's still, I better put my amplitude on there. It's still going to go from 1 to -1 because my amplitude A is just 1. This is going to be 720. This will be 360. Half of 360 is 180. So I'm counting by 180s, and so this would be 540. 360, 180 is 540. So lastly, this whole idea happens with cosine as well. Its normal cycle is still 360. Notice I keep going back to degrees. Go ahead, you're just learning this. Go back to something you're more familiar with, like degrees. So 360 divided by 3. So this is going to take place in 120 degrees. So if you recall, cosine starts up here at 1, comes down and makes this cycle. So this would be 120 halfway. Notice my halves here are counting by 30. 30, bottom is 60, next point is 90, and top is 120. And this is still -1 and 1 for the height. So my amplitude is still that distance between, and that's still going to be 1.